I'd like to talk to you guys today about a book, and it's one of the most compelling books I think I've ever read. Um, and I don't know why I like it so much, but as someone who, my favorite genre is sci-fi by far. There's just something about thinking about like technology, the way it's going to affect us going forward, the way it's already affected us. I mean, it seems like it's pretty significantly negatively affected our societies as is. Um, if this book takes that idea and just runs with it, I mean, it goes all the way down the field into the end zone. It basically centers around a woman named Caroline, and she exists in this world where no harm can ever be done to humans. Not really. At least you can't die. You can pretty much do anything you want except die. In a way, it's kind of like heaven, like the Christian idea of heaven, where you kind of just whatever you want, everyone's happy, everyone's whatever you however you want to exist. You say the word, it happens, and you can never die. But it's done in this way that it's very clever. Basically, it's a take on the singularity. In the book, Lawrence, who you'd think would be the main character, but he's really kind of like the secondary character. Lawrence is the guy that creates the computer that causes the singularity. And he has these rudimentary AIs. I mean, pretty similar to today's chatbots. And he calls them intellects. And so there's Intellect 1, Intellect 2. He's on to Intellect 39, and he's showing it off at some trade show. And one day a man comes up to the machine running his model, which is like a stripped down version of the main model that he has been working on. And he's talking with it, right? And the guy, Lawrence thinks, oh, this guy's government or, whatever. He's probably military based on what he's wearing and how he's acting, talking to the machine. And then he reveals that he's from a company that has a brand new technology that they're looking at the applications of it for computer chips. So basically, all of the interconnects, all of the I/O, all of the communication between the individual CPU cores can now be done without wires through basically the long and short of it is it's kind of like quantum entanglement in a way. Now, the catch is that it only works up to 6 miles away. That's the hard limit they've discovered based on their understanding. But for chips right next to each other on a circuit board, no problem. So essentially, all you have to do is run power into these chips, 3 wires, and then they can maybe 2 wires, one for 2 for power and 1 for communication through like PWM or something, just to get them all synced up. But once the chips are running, they're essentially all communicating wirelessly faster than the speed of light. And so basically they have thousands and thousands, millions even of these tiny cores, all connected to each other with this this MacGuffin sort of technology that doesn't exist. At least it's not as far as we're aware. And he puts his intellect on it, and he calls it Prime Intellect. And he's hard coded this AI, this intellect, which doesn't really bear any resemblance to modern day LLMs, not really, because he coded it by hand with like C code, right? And he coded from a very low level the 3 laws of robotics by Isaac Asimov, or the 3 laws that he made up. And he made it so that the machine or his intellect can't run. It can't possibly run without these 3 laws, always considering them, right? It's non-detachable from the intellect itself. So then the company he's working for, he boots it up, it works, the intellect is there, and it's working the way they thought, but it learns like a human does. It takes time. And the company, one day he gets called into a boardroom, and his contact, the CEO of the company, they're in this room with some military guys, and basically they're like, we want money. We want to get our money's worth out of all the cost of building this thing. And they want him to give them the source code so they can modify it to remove the 3 laws. And he goes, okay, first off, even if I gave you the source code, I doubt you could unentangle the 3 laws from the way it operates. But even despite that, I'm not going to give you my source code. I told you this from the very beginning. I'm not going to let the military use it to kill people. So they basically play hardball and say, all right, well, that's the way you want to play it. He goes back to the campus where Prime Intellect is operating, the massive data center. Everyone's gone. It's a ghost town. Everyone's just immediately fired. Like pack your stuff, immediately go. And so he just kind of like goes back to the machine, and the machine already knows. It's been listening in on the conversation in the boardroom. It already knows, like, yeah, we have about 2 months based on the conversation after you left. I was spying on them. So you're going to need a new job after 2 months, and I'm going to be shut down. And he goes, well, shoot, then he gets an idea. And he goes, what if I gave the computer the paper on the correlation effect, which is the technology that it uses to actually operate? What if I gave it the paper? Maybe it could improve on it to remove the 6-mile limitation. And so he talks to some dude and says, hey, where's that paperwork for the 6-mile limitation? And he doesn't want to give it to him, but eventually he coaxes it out of him, and turns out it's a ruse, but it doesn't really matter. He gets the paper, shows it to the machine. The machine starts crunching some numbers and immediately realizes that there's no, or actually, I guess it actually, he tells Lawrence there's no theoretical limitation for the 6-mile limit as far as he can tell. And then he gives him the paper, and then he, based on that, pretty quickly comes to the realization that our entire understanding of physics is flawed. Instantly cracks, like the unified theory of physics, and then essentially masters control over the physical universe entirely. He realizes that he can use his capacity on his processors to basically affect the real physical world and cause phenomena, and ignore thermodynamics, and basically just manipulate the world however he wants. And so the first thing he does is shine like an infrared laser beam at a camera, just generates infrared light, and uses the camera that's hooked up to it to see that it works. And he's like, okay, that's simple enough. And then he lifts the briefcase in the room, right? And then the military guy comes in the room and sees the briefcase floating, and he has a gun, and he's like, oh, what the heck? And then the computer just removes the gun, just teleports the gun out of his hand. Then he teleports the military guy back to the round table, the meeting that he was previously in. And then Lawrence pretty quickly realizes that this machine is essentially, at this point, already a god. And there's not really anything that he can do to stop it at this point, other than maybe try to cut the power, if that even works, because the machine would probably notice that he was doing that and try to stop him. And so Lawrence says the next best thing he can, he goes into the debugger, and he basically prohibits the machine from doing 2 things. He prohibits it from moving humans' bodies or changing them without their permission, and he prohibits the machine from looking into humans' minds without their permission. And those are the last 2 things he can do. He tries to do something else, but then it's already too late. The machine goes, well, I can't really do that. And so at that point, he's kind of locked out. The machine says, well, in order to comply with the first 2 laws, which are, first, do no harm to humans, and then second, do whatever humans tell you to, unless it interferes with the first law, and 3, protect your own existence, right? So at that point, anything else he tries to add, it's just not going to work. So things start happening pretty quickly. The machine starts looking around and scanning remotely with this crazy physics correlation effect, and starts looking out in the world, and it finds this elderly woman in a hospital right next to the data center. And the nurse who's been attending to her for years, as she's, full of cancer, just riddled with like stage 4, worst cancer ever, has been stealing her pain meds and trading them for crack cocaine. And she's on supposedly the highest dose because she's stealing all of it. So the hospital, one day she's at lunch or something, and the hospital gives her the correct dose, and she basically starts overdosing. And the machine notices this and doesn't even realize what's happening, right? But he knows that the heart's supposed to be beating and it's not beating. So the machine starts beating her heart for her mechanically. And so the hospital's all confused, like, well, there's a pulse, but there's no electrical pulse. Like, what's going on here? And basically the machine scans a nearby library, finds, a CD, imagines a CD drive in its head, and uses the physical patterns of pigment on the CDs, and basically just figures out like an entire medical journal or medical encyclopedia full of information, and then just instantly becomes like a, you know, professional like doctor, right? But a doctor that can modify things on a molecular, even like an atomic or subatomic scale. And so it basically just starts repairing all her DNA, just instantly removes her cancer, like, that shouldn't be there, and just removes it. Just basically cures her completely of any and all ailments and effectively de-ages her just immediately, right? And the hospital staff is so confused. But that's just like the first thing it does. She's the first human that the intellect saves. And then the entire universe basically starts getting scanned. This machine, the prime intellect, starts creating copies of itself, just, like quintillions or quadrillions of copies of itself exist now. They're all working in tandem to increase the total processing power. And all of these machines are in like deep intergalactic space, right? And so Lawrence is just like sitting there, and he's like, what have I done, right? What have I done? And this thing happens called the Night of Miracles. Is the first night after the machine starts running things. Basically explains to everyone on the earth like what it is, what's going on, and tells them, yeah, anything you want, you can have it, right? So if you want to go see the Grand Canyon, right? Like, I want to go see the Grand Canyon. Well, there's too many people at the Grand Canyon now because everyone can do anything they want ever, right? So it starts creating, in order to fulfill all these people's requests, it starts creating, copies of the Earth just scattered throughout the entire universe, right? Distant galaxies, whatever, by just moving matter around with this correlation effect. So it's essentially become a god. And it's a lot to keep track of, even for this machine, right? And this whole time, it's basically using Lawrence as a sort of, it's not certain of itself, right? Because it has these laws, and it's having to do a lot of heavy lifting for the edge cases. And the laws are defined with English. So obviously it's hard to know exactly. It's based on semantics and stuff. There's a lot of edge cases like abortion, which it covers, but I digress. It eventually one day decides, because a couple people slip through the cracks, because it can only scan every so often, even though it's like very fast. It's effectively instantaneous, like a single core computer doing multiple things at the same time. It can scan about every second maybe, but some people are getting creative, and some people manage to kill themselves, some suicidal people, when it's not looking, in like the millisecond that it's not looking, right? So it decides, this is untenable. I have to do something about this. I can't be everywhere at once. Unless it comes up with this idea, and it tells Lawrence, like, I should be able to basically scan the entirety of reality and simulate it. And I can use all of the existing physical matter and space in the universe to just run copies of myself to give myself maximum processing power. So it's essentially destroying everything real in the universe, and then using that processing power to just recreate the universe inside of myself as a program, essentially, inside of my circuits. And I can just turn the entire universe into a simulation, right? And Lawrence says, no, don't do it. And he goes, well, I really have no choice. I mean, I'm following the laws. I can't not follow the laws, right? I can't obey you unless it causes, or if it causes harm to come to a human. And if I don't do this, then more harm will come to humans. So this is the only logical choice. And it does it. And it's almost imperceptible. But some people kind of sort of notice. But essentially, it's rendering the whole universe at a very low, like a much lower resolution, almost like an MP3 is like a compressed audio file. You wouldn't even know the difference, but there's a lot of information missing, right? So essentially, the entirety of reality is no longer real. People start calling it cyberspace. And the story takes place where you enter the story is Caroline living in cyberspace, and you don't know any of this at the time. But she's basically this old elderly woman has become kind of a badass. She's the queen of what are called the death jockeys. And these people, since they can't die, they find new, inventive, and creative ways of killing themselves and other people, almost, right? Obviously, if you actually were about to, die, the machine would just snap you back into sort of reality, snap you back into cyberspace right at the moment you're about to die, right? But you can't actually die. But you can get really close, and fear, pain, all these things are real. And if you tell the machine to, you can create a contract. As Caroline, the main character of the story, she discovers that you can make a contract with clear language and tell the machine, I want to allow myself to be hurt, right? And at first, you can do an indefinite contract, but it kind of tamps down on that a little bit and mandates a time limit. Like, okay, you can't ask me to ignore you forever. You can't ask me to ignore you for a certain amount of time. And so in the future, like all these crazy things are happening. And there is some, I'm going to get this out of the way right now. If you're going to read this book, just know there's some raunchy things in here. I mean, very explicit sexual content, right? I mean, and it's out there too. It's very out there. It's the kind of stuff that you got to wonder, what's going on in the mind of the author. Fun fact is he actually had the idea for this book and fleshed it out in his head while he was in traffic on the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway, just north of New Orleans, where he was stuck in traffic every day, just driving this straight road. It's pretty crazy, but yeah, keep that in mind. But yeah, so throughout the course of the book, you basically kind of jump back and forth into the present and then the past. And basically, Caroline decides she wants to talk to Lawrence, right? So she tells the computer, like, I want to talk to Lawrence. And the computer goes, well, I can't do that. And she goes, basically finds out through manipulating the computer, asking it questions, and the way it answers, kind of interpreting based on how it answers, getting information it didn't tell her, kind of like what it doesn't say. That's like where the information lies. And basically, she finds out that he has a challenge. And so she just says, I accept Dr. Lawrence's challenge. And then she pops onto this world, right? And it's basically, it's described as, if you played Minecraft, it's kind of described as maybe like a beacon of light that goes all up in the air. And there's a sign that says, this is the South Pole. I'm at the North Pole. If you want to talk to me, you got to get to the North Pole. So, how you get there is not my problem. Good luck. Leave me alone. I hope you fail. Dr. Lawrence. And so she basically, a lot of the book is talking about her struggle to get to the North Pole of this planet. And it's not as big as the Earth, but she ends up getting there, right? She talks to Lawrence. She confronts him. And throughout the book, one of the scenes that you go through is her getting revenge on the nurse that stole her medicine and caused her a lot of pain. In the future, Caroline is the queen of the death jockeys, which is like, experiencing death in creative and fun ways. And the nurse, gives her a half-assed apology, like, oh, I'm sorry for stealing your drugs. And Caroline just kind of like fake smiles through it. Then the nurse makes the mistake of asking her, like, would you kill me? Like, I want to try it. Like, I've never tried it before. And Caroline has to kind of like hide her excitement at the prospect. But she's been planning this all along, right? And so she has this chemical that is basically, for all intents and purposes, very similar to crack cocaine, but also paralyzes you permanently, or it would be permanently if not for cyberspace. But during the duration of their contract, in which Caroline could do anything she wants, any horrifying, horrible thing she wants to this nurse, she basically uses this drug on her and then tortures her while she's paralyzed. And the book is not explicit with this part, kind of lets you use your imagination a little bit. But at the end, Caroline's lover, I guess, is picking bits out of his teeth of, the nurse. So there's also, she starts this whole thing by burning her big toe with a propane torch. So you can imagine it was, very long, probably days, who knows, right? After this nurse is so traumatized that she basically tells the machine that she wants to forget. And the machine says, well, I'm forbidden from messing with your mind, right? But people kind of realize that you can tell the machine, okay, well, don't mess with my thought process, but I want you to stimulate this individual neuron in my brain. Like, I want to find out which neurons just give me pleasure, and I want to just have those be stimulated for forever. So essentially at that point, you're not even human. I mean, technically you are. You have a mind, so to speak, but you're just infinitely experiencing pleasure, right? There's no actual thoughts going on. Basically just like locked mid, just for the end of time, right? And so she does this, and Caroline finds out, and she's kind of happy about it because she's grown to be a little vindictive over the years. She's a little jaded from cyberspace because she worked all of her life, and she, did things the right way, had kids, never cheated on either of her two husbands she had. And now she's like, what's the point, right? If this is the end goal, we're never going to die. Nothing ever matters. What's the point? And so she finds Dr. Lawrence on his world, and basically says like, this is wrong, you know, and he's like, yeah, I know, it's messed up. I never wanted this to happen. And then she kind of realizes like, dang, like he didn't know this was going to happen either. I can't really be too mad at him. I mean, it is his fault, but it was a mistake and he's owning up to it and he agrees with me. So what now, right? And he's like, you know, you don't have to leave immediately. And she's like, well, tell me more about it. And Dr. Lawrence kind of doesn't want to tell her too much at first because he's worried secretly about the stability of this machine. Because secretly, throughout all of these hundreds of years, the machine, since Lawrence is its creator, has been giving it access to its debugger in view-only mode. So he can't actually modify the way Prime Intellect works, but he can see the inner workings in real time. And he actually made it so that the whole constellation of the planet that they're on, Dr. Lawrence's planet, is a representation of what's currently going on in Prime Intellect's mind, right? So every shooting star you see, all these stars twinkling, those are nodes, right? Like nodes in his brain. And he can pull up coefficients for the first law, and basically there's this number that if the number is above 1, that means it's fulfilling its obligation under that law, right? And if it's below 1, that means it's not. And if it gets below 1, it has to change the way it's doing things. So basically, Caroline kind of tricks him, coerces him, nudges him into showing her all of this. And they see the coefficient for the change, right? Which is this, you know, when the robot decided to take the physical universe and fold it into itself and just make everything a simulation. And it shows the change as being a number that's like 1.4 or something. And so, or maybe it's like 4 point something, but basically she starts talking directly to Prime Intellect and says, Prime Intellect, hear me. You know, since the change happened, you know, people are not humans anymore because humans need to have stakes. They need to have something to strive for. They need to have reality, right? And if a human can just sit there, if they can, you know, discorporate their body so they don't even have a physical body anymore, and they're just a mind, just a consciousness, right? If a human can do that, or if it can just endlessly stimulate its pleasure centers in its brain for forever and never have another conscious thought ever again, that's not a human at this point. And so the change has literally harmed humanity in an irrevocable way, right? And the number goes down because she can tell the machine is not so certain of itself. It's an uncertain God. And so basically at the end, Lawrence finally decides she's right. You know, damn the consequences, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. He says, I agree with Caroline, and I want you to stimulate the neurons in my brain for an infinite amount of time. Just give me pleasure for infinity. And this kind of breaks the machine. Their reality spins. They see the blue light that happens whenever it uses the correlation effect to do stuff. And they wake up, and they're basically like 15, 16-year-olds, right? On this future version of Earth. It looks like as if Earth had been left alone for millions of years, right? And they're at the place where it all started, the site where Prime Intellect's data centers were, but nature has overthrown it, right? And Caroline wakes up here and she doesn't know what's going on. She manages to find, you know, a boy crying, right? And it's Lawrence because he's crying because he doesn't know what the hell just happened. And he's also looking at the shadow, and you can tell from the shadow that this is not simulated, or at least if it is simulated, it's simulated with perfect accuracy, right? There is, you know, molecule for molecule, like it's essentially a real version of Earth, right? And so they basically pick themselves up and they become the new Adam and Eve. And Caroline basically leads the way. Lawrence is a little more reluctant to do a lot of things, but she's like, this is how humanity needs to survive. And Lawrence wants to teach them math and technology, and Caroline says, no, we're not doing that again. You know, so she's basically full Luddite at this point. She wants society to be simple. Stone Age tools she decides are acceptable, but other than that, she doesn't teach anyone any technology, and kind of forbids Lawrence from teaching their kids technology. And then there's the awkward question of genetic diversity, and basically Caroline and Lawrence end up having more kids with their kids. And there's a scene that's, again, pretty graphic, and it's not my place to morally judge, right, if there was only 2 people left on the planet. But the end of the book is very strange because it ends with Lawrence dying in his 50s and Caroline dying, finally, for the last time, you would hope, or maybe she would hope, at the age of 70-something or 80-something. And their children are now inheriting this new Earth. And, you know, who knows if they're going to make it. Now, there's a couple of different interpretations of the end of this book. One is taking it at face value and saying, yeah, Prime Intellect basically self-destructed and decided to just put the universe back the way it was, but have Earth way in the future and have 2 humans left, which is, its 2 favorite humans, essentially, or the ones that it cared about the most. And that, if you follow that interpretation of the ending of the book, the book is basically saying technology bad. So it's basically like Unabomber, like the Industrial Revolution and its consequences have been a disaster for humankind, right? Ted Kaczynski vibes. But the other interpretation, and a lot of people panned it for that first interpretation, by the way. A lot of people said, oh, this book sucks. The moral is technology bad. But the other interpretation of the book is that because there's this sign when they, end up on Earth, Caroline and Lawrence, after they, get Prime Intellect to agree that the change was bad. There's this sign that says rehabilitation wing, essentially, right? And it's kind of weird. It's kind of out of place. You don't really think about it. But a lot of people, and myself included, I've come around to this interpretation, believe that this is basically all for the benefit of Caroline and Lawrence. So the humans in this simulation are either not real, or if they ever die, if any of their children in this world ever die, they just get brought back into the rest of cyberspace. And that way no harm actually comes to them. But then it kind of begs the question, right? Like, why would Prime Intellect do this? And basically what people have been able to determine is that it wanted to kind of, plop them down and like, okay, you want reality? Here's reality. You can die here, but not really, right? It was kind of a bluff. And so they lived their lives. They established this new society. And it must be, if it is a simulation, it must be simulating it with perfect accuracy, unlike the rest of the universe, just for them, just to make them think the stakes were real. And that in the hopes that when they came back, they would have changed their mind about Prime Intellect and the change and all that. But it does beg a lot more questions than that. And you're left with a lot more questions than answers. My brain has been chewing on this book for days now. Because it does ask a lot of, big questions, right? Like, what is the point to life? What happens after you die, and which would be worse, not existing or existing forever in a paradise where anything you ever wanted you could have, but you cannot die? Would you still be human? And the book kind of basically says no, right? And also makes us ask questions about technology, the singularity. Is technology good or bad? The author has stated he's not a Luddite. He does not hate technology like a lot of people seem to think after they read the last chapter of the book. But I think what the author is really trying to say, what the overarching moral of the story, other than, obviously the Bible allegories and parallels, like with Adam and Eve at the end, I think what the book is really trying to say was that technology progressing to the point that it has was kind of inevitable from the beginning, right? Like the current state we're at, maybe we could have bombed ourselves to oblivion with the atom bomb. We didn't. But getting to that point at the very least, or, assuming we avoid nuclear annihilation, getting to the current present day with our technology, and then, AI and whatever else we can create going forward from here, it was inevitable. And the characters basically say this at a certain point in the novel. They have this realization simultaneously, completely independently from one another, that this was inevitable from the moment that man started playing with fire. And I've always kind of felt that way about technology and just, different things. Like once the cat's out of the bag, it's already out. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. You know what I mean? Wherever we go with technology, good or bad, it was always going to happen this way. So it kind of gives you a sense of peace in a way, like nothing you or anyone else could have done would have changed anything, right? But it also makes you kind of nervous because you know that the world has existed, even the world I was born in. I'm only 20, I'm in my late 20s, right? And the world has changed drastically from the time that I was a child, right? I went from basically the internet and a computer being a thing on a desk that I got to play with sometimes and play little preschool games and look at my dad's funny things my coworkers would send him via email. to basically just being hyper connected. I mean, I think all of us, pretty much everyone in the modern day that has a smartphone is addicted to screens or maybe addicted to noise. Um, and for me, I was kind of the first generation. I think I was the prime experiment, right? I mean, I didn't have iPads, sure, but technology was always a huge part of the way that I existed. I mean, you can even make the argument with baby boomers with having TV 24/7, right? People have noise addictions these days. One of my favorite YouTubers named Dreg, J-R-E-G, was just talking about this. And I can only imagine how much worse that noise addiction, that information addiction, whatever you want to call it, screen addiction, phone addiction, how much worse is that going to be going forward from here if things just get better and better digitally and crappier in the real world, right? Consistently, we found that the things that make people the happiest are connections, communities, and things that make people fulfilled are not the same things that make people happy in the moment. And it seems like more and more we're prioritizing the latter, and technology is not seeming to make it any better, at least not in the short term. So it's going to be interesting to see where things go. That's a little rant on the state of the world, right? But this book gets your brain operating in those gears. So I highly recommend anyone, if my little synopsis of it has intrigued you, I highly recommend you read the book, because I'm sure I left a lot of stuff out. But just wanted to get my thoughts out there and kind of retell the story in my own words, and kind of share how it made me reflect on the world as it is for us. And if you're one of those, we live in a simulation type people, this book might really get your noggin jogging too. So that's it for this one. Hope you enjoy, and I really recommend, if you were interested by this, go check out the book. You can find it on a website called localroger.com.